Hello, everybody. This is Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. We're going to talk about a tremendous shift in Europe politically with the European Union elections having just taken place. So let's take a look at some of the outcomes so far from these elections. German conservatives finished first in the EU's elections as far-right momentum within the bloc has sent France's leadership scrambling. So France, it called a snap election because of this tremendous result from conservatives. The Conservative Alliance of the Christian Democratic Union, the Christian Social Union, garnered 30% of the vote Sunday, which is the far-right Alternative for Germany party came in second place, projected to receive 16%, a 5% point increase.
And to be clear, the AfD, the so-called German political elites call a true threat to democracy.
Exactly.
Just because the AfD is saying enough of us being run over by immigrants that are not German and not compatible with anything relating to German culture.
Well, and they're not the only ones. We see as well far-right candidate Marine Le Pen's victory took place, and that's why we called a snap election. So, the rally party in France was estimated to get around 31 to 32% of the votes, which more than doubles the share of Macron's party, which was projected to reach around 15%. So, look, a lot of details that don't matter about the parties and such, but the bottom line is we've seen a shift here with these latest EU elections.
A rightward shift based on runaway immigration and pushing back on woke government policies, forcible green mandates, all kinds of anti-competitive business practices, and jamming a destruction of European culture down Europeans' throats. And I think they've had enough of it.
But there is a reflection of the U.S. election going on this year and what happened in the European Union elections, right?
Yes,
as you say that they're demonizing the right.
They're trying to demonize the right, and in the UK, where the Tories, the right party, has been in power for a long time, they're going to get trashed at the election because they've been promising to do something about immigration and they have done nothing, and they've rolled over and gone with more forcible green policies and more DEI nonsense. It's basically been labor light, is what the Tories have been, and so don't mistake a Labour big victory in the UK, which is going to happen probably in the next month or so. Don't mistake that as any kind of actually leftward shift. That's a legitimate grievance against the policies of too much leftism in Europe.
Right, and with the weakness of conservatives in power in the UK, that creates a vacuum for Nigel Farage, the Trump ally, and now he's running, right, for a seat, and his party is probably going to pick up plenty of ground in their elections in the next month or so as well.
I didn't know he was running. That's fantastic.
He just announced last week he's running, and he's going to raise hell. And he showed up. In fact, a protester showed up at his announcement. He went into this local community, big announcement, lots of press, lots of crowds, and a local protester threw a milkshake right in his face. He took it with great aplomb and charm as usual. But he says, I'm here to raise hell. I mean, he basically said, chaos is why I'm here.
And he is right, too, because Europe is worth preserving, just like the United States is worth preserving. And this globalist push to make us all this multilateral mush is nonsense, and enough is enough.
So you mentioned the many reasons. You've got out of control illegal immigration taking place. The UK, France, they've all opened up these borders with calamitous results for people who will never assimilate with their own local culture. But you also mentioned sort of the green agenda. Let me pull this quote here that says, many would say that they believe in protecting the environment is important, but the breakneck speed at which green parties are attempting to throw Europe into banning gas home boilers and petrol-driven cars in favor of home heat pumps and electric vehicles has not proven popular at all. So the lefties are forcing these mandates and restrictions on the populace, and the populace is saying, hell no.
Not just forcing on the populace, focusing on people that are just trying to survive and raise their families, and they can't afford to pay a lot more for an electric vehicle or to pay more for their green energy versus regular hydrocarbon energy, and enough is enough. You're going to see real pushback because people are suffering from the kind of inflation. Germany closed 3 nuclear power plants, which had been running smooth and effectively and not emitting any carbon for decades, closed it after the war with Russia started, all in an effort to force wind and solar power. Now, if you've spent any time in Germany, one of the dumbest things you could do is build solar power in Germany because it's like Michigan. They have clouds and it's gray. There's like 6 months of gray season where you're not getting any kind of solar power there. It's madness.
Well, and before the Russian war, years and years ago, Germany had closed, I think, maybe as many as 19 nuclear power plants. These were clean energy. They were powerhouses.
All of which operated without drama.
Precisely. And so now they are a sort of net importer of energy. They're reliant on Russia. It is, created this tremendous imbalance in energy policy.
And they're importing gas, a hydrocarbon, and they turned off actual nuclear power. It really makes no sense.
Well, it's like the state of New York closed down their biggest baseload power generator, a nuclear power plant, and now guess what? Their emissions are way up. And
the prices are probably as well.
And the prices are way up as well. Interestingly, this is all happening at the same time that the EU has passed, big surprise, I'm sure, these new woke rules, which will regulate businesses that trade with Europe and firms that supply those companies too. So check this out. The law will not only force businesses to adopt Europe's ESG rules, which, as we know in the U.S., is environmental and social governance rules that were U.S. banks on Wall Street were convinced to adopt. So the analysts have put this ESG factor scorecard for U.S. corporations, which finally is getting pushback in a lot of states in the U.S. But, it will not only force business to adopt these rules within their own operations, but also throughout much of their supply chains, regardless of where the companies in the supply chain are located. That means countless businesses within the United States will be affected by this European Union law, and they have to change in the U.S. to do business with them, even throughout their supply chain.
Which is exactly why the kind of elections that just happened occur, and hopefully they rescind nonsense laws, because Europe cannot afford less economic growth right now, with as much as they need to be spending on defense to actually deter Russia and Ukraine. Because again, it's not the United States' responsibility to protect Europe.
History may be repeating itself here, because as you recall, it was Brexit passed in 2016. So the UK left the European Union, which was kind of a foreshadowing of the results in the United States.
Yep.
And so I almost sense we've got sort of history repeating itself. Now, it strikes me that the European Union has made themselves less and less relevant all the time. They depend on the United States to fund their beloved war in the Ukraine against Russia. They're not footing the bill themselves. They've got most of the risk, but very little of the cost. They're still not, many of the countries are still not stepped up in terms of their contribution to
especially
defense
Germany,
spending.
Especially Germany, the third largest economy in the world. They're still spending like 1.1%. They're basically half the spending. A third, the U.S. spends 3.2%. So there's no reason the U.S. taxpayers need to be spending anything like they are in Ukraine when Germany has not done anything close to what they're supposed to do under their treaty obligations.
So to those NATO members, I say, watch out, because the guy who made you accountable before is coming back. They must loathe the notion of another Trump administration, because the pressure is going to be on them again. But you know what? The little guy in America says, why in the hell are we still 80 years after D-Day, why are we still funding these people? And why aren't they paying it's fine if we go ahead and provide them protection, but why aren't they paying more of their share of it? And that's why you actually comment often that NATO is no longer a treaty alliance. It's a protectorate. Walk us through that. Explain that.
Look, when Trump took over, 5 of the 28 NATO countries actually spent 2% of their GDPs on defense. Okay, that's the stated goal agreed upon by all the NATO members. You're supposed to spend 2% of your economy on defense. 5 of 28. When Trump left office, it was up to 11 out of 28. So he at least moved the needle some. But again, some of the biggest hitters are far from that goal. Norway, they have their website with their stated sovereign wealth fund, which is north of $1 trillion for like 20 or 25 million people in Norway. $1 trillion accumulating in value every day, and they spend like 1.4%. Again, not anywhere near spending their fair share. With a savings account like that, it's a joke that the U.S. is defending Norway.
The irony is the best thing that could happen to Europe is the election of Donald Trump this November. It's the best thing because they can probably follow his lead on immigration, follow his lead on killing this green agenda. Hopefully it will, bring more conservatives into power across these countries.
Absolutely. And if people want to have a green transformation, fine. Let market forces get there. Stop with the mandates. Stop with the top-down Bolshevik coercion to say, you may not drive your petrol car anymore. We're forcing you to drive an electric vehicle, or we're forcing you to only buy green energy. That is the stuff of central planning, and that's exactly the thing that destroyed the Soviet Union.
Let's go to this exit question, because I think that the contributions of NATO members to their defense spending is not the only thing that will have to change when Donald Trump comes back in as president in January of 2025. It's also the membership and the future of NATO relative to Russia. Don't you think that this idea that Ukraine could still become a member of NATO, that others could become, what do we need to transform there?
I think for the settlement of the Ukraine fighting, the idea of Ukraine being a NATO member is going to have to come off the table. It was a dumb idea. It never should have been on the table in the first place.
Right.
And again, from a Russian perspective, having as many hostile countries on their border than any time since May of 1940, when the Nazis invaded, is a very, very bad, dangerous thing.
But is that a big card for Donald Trump to play, the idea of Ukraine membership in NATO? He says, hey, Vlad, I'm taking that card off the table. Now you need to deal.
Yes, I think, honestly, I think the way that you'll see, it's in the long-term interest of the United States to pull Russia away from the orbit of China, which the neocons and a stupid, unnecessary war in Ukraine have pushed with sanctions and trying to cut off trade, have pushed the Russians into the arms of China. And it has always been the goal for 60, 70 years to keep Russian resources, because they have an enormous amount of natural resources, to keep them out of the hands of German industry. Now all they've done is pushed them into the hands of a much greater industrialized China run by the Chinese Communist Party, not in America's interest. Culturally, we have a lot more in common with Russia than we do with India or China or Korea or Japan. And I think the way forward is to solve a real or imagined climate crisis by reducing the amount of carbon that's coming out of all the tundra of northern Siberia. Because there's like 800 gigatons a year of carbon emitted from the Earth. 10% of that is man-made. So you can solve the climate crisis by just tamping down the amount that the Earth releases naturally. And there's some measures can be taken in the north of Siberia. And that's probably a room for collaboration once the Ukraine issue is off the table.
So I know this is an oversimplification, but if we solve our Russia problem, we are thereby solving part of the China problem.
Solving a big part of the China problem, because China without Russia is not in as good a place. And you actually could solve the climate crisis as well.
Well,
with market-based, common sense solutions, not government mandates and coercion.
Well, this European Union election, I think, is a foreshadowing of things to come this year. Thank goodness. We need Donald Trump to win in November, and it'll be the best thing for Europe as well.
And if we have an honest election, he will. The thing I'm worried about, I think last time we had a voting machine problem and a lot of ballots suddenly arriving in the middle of the night.
Right.
I think the real risk now is the Motor Voter Act passed in 1993, which allowed people to register to vote when they get a driver's license. And now you see in a lot of states across America, people can get driver's licenses with really no documents. But what's supposed to happen is when they get a driver's license and they also register to vote, it's supposed to trigger the Real ID Act requirements, which requires birth certificate, American birth certificate, or a passport that shows you're an American citizen. The registrars in all these counties are not paying attention to that. And so why is the border wide open? Why is it flooding it with people that are not American, that don't have the desire for liberty? It's because they're gonna basically stuff a lot of illegal voters into the process. And so that needs to be litigated now. So you get a court decision before the election so the courts don't punt and say, well, we're not going to contest another fraudulent election.
Look, they had a solution in 2020. It was called COVID. This is their solution to Trump this year. They have flown these migrants, these illegal immigrants. I think what we're going to find, the data I think will show that primarily they flew them into 19 counties in 5 swing states. And then those registrars, by golly, are not going to apply the rules.
Yep.
And so I think you're absolutely correct that is the biggest risk we have in terms of election integrity this November, no doubt. Well, look, we're going to be back with you on more updates about the European Union, the election there, the shift to the right that's taking place, thank goodness. But for now, that's it for this segment of Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. Thanks for watching.